Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin tonight in Nunavut, where a victim of Eric de Jager is speaking out. The former Catholic priest pleaded guilty last week to sexually abusing children while stationed in Igloolik almost 50 years ago. De Jager's victim hopes that by telling her story, she can encourage others. The CBC's Emma Tranter has more.
First, a warning. This story contains details of sexual abuse.
Now, honest to goodness, that I can say that I am moving forward.
That's Tammy, which is not her real name. Her identity is still protected under a publication ban. Tammy was sexually abused by former Catholic priest Eric de Jager while he worked at a chapel at what was at the time the Indian Hospital in Edmonton, back in 1975 when she was 6 years old. De Jager was studying to become a priest then. He later went to Nunavut where he sexually abused multiple other children. Tammy says she watched de Jager's guilty plea on new sexual abuse charges in Iqaluit last week with relief and anger.
I'm very proud of these people. It's so hard to admit it. It defined me for a long time, and it's not who I am now.
Tammy says now she wants to help other victims speak out and take action against the Catholic Church like she did. Her lawyer, Robert Talek, says for him, it's also not over. He helped Tammy sue the Catholic Church in a civil case, and he hopes other victims do the same.
There has to be accountability for this type of behavior from an institution. So really the civil courts are the only mechanism right now.
De Jager is expected to be sentenced in Iqaluit on Thursday. Emma Tranter, CBC News, Yellowknife.
A person is in custody after a firearm incident in Clyde River this morning. Nunavut RCMP posted a shelter-in-place alert on Facebook around 7 a.m. It was also sent to local mobile devices. Local businesses and organizations, including the health center, school, and Northern store, were all closed for the morning. The alert was lifted around 90 minutes later. No other details have been released. A waterline break in Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, has left some residents without water. The break happened last night. The Nunavut Department of Community and Government Services says it's working to repair the damage. The break occurred along the piping system at Inukshuk Avenue and Ivik Street. Work has also been underway to keep the road clear of ice to allow local traffic through. Repairs should be complete by tomorrow. A boil water advisory is also in place for Rankin Inlet. It is, though, due to a separate mechanical issue at the water treatment plant. The advisory says it is essential to boil water for things like drinking, washing food, and brushing your teeth. The Nunavut Department of Health says the community will be notified once the advisory is lifted. In the Northwest Territories Sawtooth region, a lot rides on this year's winter road season. There were no summer barge deliveries last year, so people are hoping to haul up as much as they can. But this past week, they faced a threat: the weather. Sarah Komolowski has more.
The winter resupply for the Sawtooth is on track, despite warm temperatures causing damage to the Mackenzie Valley Winter Road. That's according to Dustin Dewar. He's the manager of highway operations in the region. Over the last 5 days, temperatures in the Northwest Territories have been an average of 14 degrees higher than seasonal, and many communities have seen temperatures above freezing. CBC spoke to Dewar about what it means for the Sawtooth Winter Road. He says the warm weather has resulted in some very rough conditions on the Mackenzie Valley Winter Road, and travel times could be twice as long as usual right now. But there have been no closures or weight restrictions yet, and temperatures across the territory are expected to begin dropping again as early as Wednesday. Dewar says that if that happens, road crews should be able to get the Mackenzie Valley Winter Road back in shape in under 2 weeks, and the resupply should be fine. But it will come with a price tag, because some parts of the road will essentially need to be rebuilt from scratch. For now, he's asking anyone traveling on the Mackenzie Valley Winter Road to drive extra carefully and to reduce their speed. Sarah Komolowski, CBC News, Yellowknife.
The price of air cargo is rising in Nunavut, and it's putting some businesses in a difficult position. The CBC's Carl Cardinal tells us how the costs are affecting business owners and what they're doing to adapt.
Merlin Racinos is the CEO of Arctic Fresh. He says freight costs have risen by around 15%. His company is exploring solutions to limit the impact on customers, such as acquiring their own aircraft or using the Yellowknife route instead of Ottawa.
This year, we were notified by Canadian North that cargo rates have increased, and they have increased dramatically across the board. It definitely had an impact on our operations. What people were able to buy with, $100 is not the same what they were able to buy $100 last year.
Joseph Murdoch Flowers is the co-executive director at the Katurturvik Community Food Center. He's overseeing the food box program in Iqaluit. He says rising delivery costs are impacting their food programs and low-income families.
The food cost of that produce box has increased by nearly 20%, and some of the products in the box have increased even more than that. So as a result, we've had to increase the price on our produce box as well.
Murdoch Flowers says a way to offset high costs is to support the local food economy. Dwayne Wilson serves as Vice President of Stakeholder Relations at Arctic Cooperative. He says airlines once competed for contracts. Now, Power Dynamic have swifted in Nunavut. However, Wilson explained that a monopoly can benefit small market if they use a model that prioritizes consumers.
If you look at the cooperative model as an example, as a way of doing business, where you've got the consumers of the service and the owners of the service are the same people, I think you have a much more natural balance.
Canadian North declined an interview, but provided a written statement, saying they offer a freight volume discount for corporate cargo customers. That discount was recently reduced due to factors such as rising fuel costs. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
Northeastern British Columbia saw a record number of magnitude 3 earthquakes last year. Many are linked to an increase in fracking activities in the area for a new pipeline. Now, some people are voicing concerns that their homes and infrastructure are in jeopardy. Susan Ormiston reports.
We are bearing the risk, and they are saying, don't worry.
But Richard Kabzums is worried. Just over a kilometre from his backyard, an oil and gas company, Ovintiv, is building a pad for 28 wells to horizontally drill and frack for natural gas beginning next month.
To build that close to us and then directionally drill underneath our houses in this area just didn't seem to be a good idea.
Fracking sends pressurized water, chemicals and sand into rock to dislodge oil and gas deposits. If it hits a fault, it can cause an earthquake. So can disposing the vast volumes of water. Kabzums has felt smaller ones before.
It felt like a truck was hitting the side of our house and the engine rumbling. So this deep, low rumbling and things would shift.
Fracking for natural gas here is booming, projected to double in the Montney Formation to feed a new pipeline carrying natural gas to the coast for export.
The more fracking we do, the more oil and gas we take, the more earthquakes we will have, and the larger is the chance that one of those earthquakes will have an undesirable consequence. It's a trade-off.
Kabzums sent 6 letters to the company. 9 of his neighbors signed a petition directed at the BC Energy Regulator.
Our house is built on a cement slab, floating slab, and it has in-floor heating. And if there is ever any damage to that, we don't know what our recourse would be.
In one response, Ovintiv said, numerous studies in Canada have concluded these events have no impact on health, safety, or the environment. Regulations say at magnitude 3 or above, operators have to pause fracking and investigate, but that won't eliminate a bigger one, says Atkinson.
If it just lights up right away and gives you a magnitude 4 or a 5 as its very first salvo, the traffic light won't work.
What people don't realize is that there's a human cost to this gas. They see a reward, we see risk.
Susan Ormiston, CBC News, near Fort St. John, BC.
People in Nunavut remembered Johnny Lyle today. He died on January 20th. His funeral took place in Cambridge Bay. He worked as a guide, interpreter, and special constable for the RCMP. In the early years, he would travel by dog team for the Hudson's Bay Company and the RCMP. Before he retired in 1984, he served at postings in Iqaluit and Cambridge Bay. Lyle was also CBC North's Cambridge Bay community reporter for many years.
They weren't just dog team mushers or just interpreters. They worked just like the RCMP, dealing with criminals, even though they did not get the full training to be officers. When Inuit observe, they learn, and that was how Johnny was.
Italuk says Lyle will be remembered for his many achievements, but his hospitality will be missed the most.
The Kanuipita National Inuit Health Survey team is going to every community in Nunavut, speaking to Inuit about their health and wellness. And every answer will help us as Inuit determine our own priorities for a healthier future. Together, we will answer the question, Kanuipita, how are we? Find out when we're coming to your community. Learn more at qnihs.ca.
Your once stolen vehicle in West Africa.
That is crazy.
Jumped in a car and then off they went.
I want my truck back.
300% increase in auto theft.
300%.
It's organized crime, well financed.
They are selling vehicles that are insecure.
They're working on it.
We hear that from a lot of automakers.
Yeah.
We think we found your car.
Oh my goodness.
This is CBC North on your smart TV, because CBC News is now streaming local. Local news and weather on your connected TV or favorite device. CBC News North, streaming now.
It makes sense that they get a larger share, or does it?
Welcome to the Greenbelt.
All of this, just single detached homes?
Yes.
What do we know? I think we can explain.
About that with Andrew Chang.
The Yukon Quest gets underway this weekend. This year's race will travel between Teslin and Faro. The race no longer travels to Alaska due to disagreements between Yukon Quest officials on both sides of the border. And while the temperature is expected to drop before the mushers hit the trail, it's been an extremely mild January. That could mean crusty, icy conditions on the trail this year. One researcher says that'll be an increasing problem as climate change intensifies, and it'll be harder to plan routes for the race in the future.
I expect those maybe more important weather swings, like we've seen now in southern Yukon, from November to January at least, we have rain events once in a while that definitely affect the snowpack characteristics. And so we're not necessarily thinking about a kind of a runoff event and a breakup, a river ice breakup in the middle of winter. That's not necessarily happening in the, in the next 10 years in Yukon. But we'll definitely have, problems with water that didn't freeze in the snowpack that is not or less ideal for dog teams.
The quest kicks off this Sunday in Teslin. The city of Whitehorse has tabled its proposed operating budget for 2025. The focus of this year's spending is on safety, accessibility, and the maintenance of aging infrastructure. If approved, it'll be the largest in the city's history at $119 million. Whitehorse's mayor calls the budget no frills, with no excessive spending. He says it's a necessary move to meet the demands of a rapidly growing city.
And when you're dealing with a community that's growing, you have to hire more people, you have to provide more frontline service, you have to keep up with your asset management, it's called, boring terminology, but you know what? It's so important. It's kind of like your car. If you don't put in fresh oil, at some point that engine's just not going to work anymore. Mm-hmm. And we have the same issue with all of our infrastructure in the city of Whitehorse, and we have to keep up with it.
If approved, homeowners in Whitehorse will see their property tax increase by 4.62%. People can have a say on the budget at City Council on February 10th. A Yukon nonprofit is getting a major funding boost, almost $600,000 over 3 years. Yukon Venture Angels launched 3 years ago. Its mission is connecting local businesses with private investors. The funding it received is a combination of territorial and federal money. It'll go toward helping local entrepreneurs and diversifying the territory's economy.
It doesn't mean that the company has to scale like a wild Shopify tech startup. It could literally be that your favorite local restaurant wants to double their operations or wants to open later on Sundays or simply has succession planning and no longer wants to operate but wants someone to take it over. So we're not necessarily looking at flooding the market with startups. I think the term startup is a little bit misleading because you can be at almost any point in your business and have investment.
Crawford was recently hired to help with this push. Yukon Venture Angel was entirely volunteer run until this recent cash infusion. Crawford says anyone can be an investor and any local business could be worth investing in. For the next 3 days, Whitehorse is hosting a conference where Indigenous governments can exchange ideas on conserved areas. The North Slope Wildlife Management Advisory Council is welcoming 28 nations from across North America. In recent years, there's been growing interest across the country to develop Indigenous protected and conserved areas. The idea is to solidify citizens' connections to the land and water while protecting the environment for generations. The chair of the Inuvialuit Game Council says the conference is an opportunity to share ideas.
And they can open up a lot of doors to take them out on the land, to show them, like we know that, our elders are getting old, our youth is young, and they want to learn to go out. And it's good for the people when they have areas like that where they can take them out on the land and show them, and the elders can see what they used to do, and they can teach their youth of how to do things. And that's the way I was taught, was to respect the land, respect the animals, respect the waters. And it's very important for the youth to hear that.
The conference will also touch on topics like developing land guardian programs and how to finance conserved areas. The event wraps up on Thursday. The public inquiry looking into foreign election meddling has submitted its final report. The commissioner says there were attempts by foreign countries to interfere in the past 2 Canadian elections, but they didn't impact what party came into power. The public's trust, though, has taken a hit. The final report found issues with the government's handling of foreign meddling, and the commissioner is now trying to clear up a cloud of suspicion hanging over parliamentarians. Ashley Burke has the story.
After a 15-month investigation, this commissioner says there's no doubt countries like China and India are trying to meddle in Canadian politics. But she found no evidence Canadian parliamentarians are conspiring to help them.
While I saw evidence of some concerning behavior, the evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
The government tasked Marie-Josée Augue with investigating foreign interference in the past 2 federal elections. She spoke to more than 100 witnesses, including the Prime Minister, his inner circle, and officials, and reviewed tens of thousands of classified documents. One of her jobs was to weigh in on an explosive report by a committee of parliamentarians with top-secret security clearance. It alleged that some unnamed parliamentarians are semi-witting or witting participants of foreign states trying to meddle in Canadian democracy.
Such phenomena remain marginal and so far appear to have been largely ineffective.
Augue said there are legitimate concerns about parliamentarians having problematic relationships with foreign officials, showing poor judgment, or acting naive. She said some may have benefited without even knowing it, but it hasn't had much of an impact.
Nor Have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament?
The commissioner was very, very straightforward.
This expert says that key finding throws cold water on the past report's allegation.
Now Commissioner Hogue has come out and essentially said, look, we need to step back, take a deep breath. The evidence is not as consequential or significant as we thought.
The commissioner also looked into how the government handled foreign interference and found that at times it acted too slowly to respond. Information sometimes didn't get to the right people, and called the government a poor communicator, saying there needed to be much more transparency to let the public know what was going on. She's now issued more than 50 recommendations and says that some of them could be addressed before the election this year. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada's military police are under investigation. An Ontario judge says their investigators tampered with evidence, showed bias, and acted beyond the scope of their jurisdiction in a sexual assault case. The misconduct was considered so egregious, the judge stayed the charges against an active member of the Canadian Armed Forces. Nicole Williams has the story.
It's a case unlike any other Austin Corbett has ever defended.
I have seen aspects of everything that happened in this case, in other cases, to a certain extent, but never on this scale.
His client, a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, charged with assaulting and sexually assaulting his wife, a military reservist. Those charges now stayed because of Canadian military police misconduct during the investigation. In a Superior Court decision earlier this month, the judge says military police tried to conceal, downplay, and rationalize their misconduct during pre-trial testimony, but were ultimately found to demonstrate a bias in favor of the complainant, including supporting the complainant in family court. They failed to properly record testimonials and conversations relating to the investigation, and at one point even withheld and destroyed evidence.
There was a lot missing. It took sort of months of work and repeated re-requests to the Crown Prosecutor's office and from the Crown Prosecutor to the police in order to slowly sort of piece together a lot of the missing pieces.
The judge ruled military police also failed to hand over the case for investigation by civilian forces, despite this announcement from the Minister of National Defence at the time.
It is extremely important that the survivors of sexual misconduct in the military have recourse to the civilian legal system.
The judge wrote that the misconduct in this case is so egregious and systemic that it shocks the community's conscience.
So what this case represents is an object example of a failure over the course of many years to hold investigators accountable for misconduct.
Others suggest the only way to get answers is a public inquiry into military police operations.
I'm asking myself, how many other cases have these individuals been involved with?
The Office of the Canadian Forces Provost Marshal oversees military police in this country. It says it respects the judge's decision in this case, and its Office of Professional Standards has launched its own investigation into what happened. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
There are many factors that can shorten our life expectancy, including having ADHD, according to new research out of the UK. As the CBC's Jennifer Yoon reports, researchers hope the new data can lead to earlier diagnoses and better treatments for adults living with the disorder.
I found out I had ADHD this year too. Does anybody have that?
For the stand-up comic, joking about his ADHD is a coping mechanism, but he wonders
I'm turning 50 this year.
What his life would have been like if he had received treatment earlier.
I think a lot of things would have changed. And I went through that process of just kind of mourning that life.
People with attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder have a hard time focusing, and they're at higher risk of health issues like reduced sleep, substance use, and suicide, all factors that can contribute to a shorter lifespan. British researchers found men with ADHD lived 4.5 to 9 fewer years than their counterparts. For women, it was 6.5 to nearly 11 years on average.
I was surprised by the amount. People with ADHD are more likely to take risks and are more likely to struggle with addiction to alcohol, cigarettes, or recreational drugs.
But he stresses the findings may not reflect those with mild symptoms or those without a diagnosis. This psychiatrist says he's not surprised. He's hoping those who need help and a diagnosis can more easily get it.
This will probably lead to identifying ADHD as a legitimate medical illness that does compromise people's longevity.
Better, good cat.
And there are treatments and lifestyle changes that can help.
Yeah, good job.
Like regular exercise, which can be difficult for people with ADHD who struggle with coordination and concentration.
Well, we know that physical activity can help to mitigate some of those modifiable risk factors. So what we're hoping is that the people that we teach over time will stay active.
You could be whatever you want.
Therapy and medication can also help those with ADHD lead full, healthy lives.
Amazing.
Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
An elder in Sanilayak, Nunavut has recreated a dwelling from his past, a traditional Inuit sod house. Laimiki Inuarak says he lived in one for 2 decades, starting in 1943. Back then, he says, resources were scarce. They used bones for the framework, then covered them with skins and soil. Now he's built one using scrap wood and what he calls the beautiful red soil around Sanilayak.
I sat down where I once used to sit, seeing the porch where we used to dry up our gear, seeing it and our sleeping area along with the hulik traditional oil lamps, seeing them. I started shedding tears as it brought me back to my memories of living in the traditional sod dwelling.
He says the main reason he built the sod house was so his wife and others had a place to sew. And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
How can any of this be fair?
Now you might think, hey, we just need more doctors, but that's not really it.
Russian scheme here
shows you where it starts, where it ends.
Were you really willing to risk that job? Yes.
At Thunder Bay's favorite festival, Wake the Giant.
Ta-da! There it is.
Stream anytime. CBC News.
We're here to get it done.
We're here to show up and show off. Here we go. Let's play the feud, Canadian style. Here we go.
Family Feud Canada. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Detective Constable.
Don't discount her instincts. She'll follow them with or without you.
Go yourself!
In my experience, it's best to know what she's thinking.
Join me for Commotion, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.